Greetings, friends and brethren. This is Dr. Bob Thiel of the Continuing Church of God. Today, I want to give a sermon, the fourth part of a multi-part sermon covering the entire book of Daniel. The first three sermons, we covered the first 8 chapters of the book of Daniel. Today, we plan to cover chapter 9 and address the 70 years and the multi-part 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel. In the December 1965 Good News magazine from the old Radio Church of God, they published an article, and the title was, Daniel 9 Proves Jesus is the Christ. Now this had to do with what's known as the 70 weeks prophecy, which we're going to get into. And many people inside the Church of God, as well as outside the Church of God, believe that prophecy points to Jesus. However, nowadays you got secular sources like Wikipedia. They downplay the significance of this prophecy because if they accepted it, it would undermine their anti-biblical view. They've got an anti-biblical view of most of their scholars, and it's unfortunate that. And with that said, 70 weeks prophecy is included in the 9th chapter of Book of Daniel. But before we get to that prophecy, we'll start with chapter 9, verse 1, where you read not about the 70 weeks prophecy per se, but about 70 years. So starting in Daniel chapter 9, verse 1, and I will primarily be reading from the New King James Version of the Bible. We read, In the first year of Darius, the king of Ahasuerus, of the lineage of the Medes, who was made a king over the realm of the Chaldeans, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by the books the number of years specified by the word of the Lord through Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. Now notice that desolations plural is part of that prophecy. Now as far as the period of its fulfillment, I went and I saw something from the Study Bible commentary. And here's what it says. The 70-year desolation, and they use singular, of Jerusalem is a significant prophetic period that reflects God's judgment and mercy. This period began with the first deportation of Jews to Babylon in 605 and concluded with the decree of Cyrus, allowing the Jews to return in 538. But that only adds up to 67 years. So I've seen other Protestants say, well, just approximate. No, I don't believe that. So when I looked at it in more depth, I also noticed something put out by the Old Worldwide Church of God, or somebody in Old Worldwide Church of God back in 1986, that talked about this period of 605 or 606. In 605, it has it in the middle of the year 605, and 606 in the spring. So what does that have to do with anything? Well, if that's correct, then instead of this being a 67-year period, it's a 66-and-a-half-year period. But the Bible says 70 years for desolations. Yeah, well, we had the one desolation, which was 66-and-a-half years, and we're going to talk about another one later. You'll read in Daniel 9:27. So it's possible that the 7 years is broke up into those two parts. I'm not vehemently asserting that, but to me that's consistent with the historical record as well as the prophetic word. Now, as it turns out, Jeremiah in Jeremiah 52 verse 29 referred to the deportation of the Jews from the kingdom of Judah. And that began probably 605 or 606, but he didn't list a number of years in that particular prophet writing. Now, as far as the 70 years go, Dr. Grammer of Dallas Theological Seminary, he pointed to a bunch of other things in Jeremiah, but they weren't the right thing. They had to do with the captivity of Babylon, and not the same thing. So be careful about relying on Protestant sources. But again, you say, but you just read something from the Study Bible. Correct, I saw it had some useful information and incomplete information. Okay, so we can learn from all kinds of sources, but we have to be careful. Anyway, I will comment that Daniel didn't say that Jeremiah wrote about the 70 years. It just said that these were given or spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. And so he may have said something else specifically about the 70 years that we didn't see. Anyway, after the verse, just a couple of verses, let's go down to verse 3 of Daniel chapter 9. We read that Daniel prays. Then I set my face toward the Lord God to make request by prayer and supplication with fasting, sackcloth, and ashes. And I prayed to the Lord my God and made confession and said, O Lord, great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant and mercy with those who love him and with those who keep his commandments. So we're supposed to love God and keep his commandments. Same thing for Christians. We have sinned and committed iniquity. We've done wickedly and rebelled, even by departing from your precepts and your judgments. Neither we heeded your servants the prophets who spoke in your name to our kings and our princes, to our fathers, and to all the people of the land. O Lord, righteousness belongs to you, but to us a shame of face, as it is this day, to the men of Judah, to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and all Israel, those near and far off, in all the countries which you have driven them. Why? Because of the unfaithfulness which they've committed against you. So Daniel admits his people sinned and they didn't follow God. Looking for something else. One of the booklets I wanted to hold up, but I'm not running into it. Oh, here it is. I held this one up before. We read Daniel prayed a lot, and with our free book, this free booklet, it's available at cog.org. This is an artist representation of one of the times Daniel prayed. Anyway, going to Daniel 9, this time verse 8. O Lord, to us belongs the shame of face, to our kings, our princes, our fathers, because we have sinned against you. To the Lord our God belongs mercy and forgiveness, though we rebelled against him. A lot of people do not understand about God's plan in terms of mercy and forgiveness. I'm looking for one of the other books that we have here. For some reason it's not coming to my... Oh, here it is. Universal Offer of Salvation. If you're not in the Church of God, or even if you are, you may not realize how much mercy God has and how much of it is played out or laid out in his Word. This particular book has hundreds of scriptures explaining God's plan of salvation, which is quite different than what, let's say, the average Greco-Roman Catholic or Protestant believes. Again, Daniel mentions about to our Lord God belongs mercy and forgiveness. Again, this is available at cog.org. Though we've rebelled against him, we've not obeyed the voice of the Lord our God to walk in his laws, which he set before us by his servants the prophets. Yes, all Israel has transgressed your law and has departed, so they will not obey your voice. Therefore, the curse and the oath of the law of Moses, the servant of God, have been poured on us, because we have sinned against him. He has confirmed his words, which he spoke against us and against our judges who judged us. So basically he's saying the religious, political leaders didn't do what they were supposed to do in Israel either, by bringing upon us a great disaster. For under the whole heaven there has never been done as what's been done to Jerusalem. So in terms of various curses that were supposed to hit them, Daniel's referring to things you can read about in Leviticus chapter 26 and Deuteronomy 28. Now, back to Daniel 9. This time we'll pick up verse 13. And as is written in the law of Moses, all this disaster has come upon us. Right? Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28. Yet we've not made our prayer before the Lord our God, that we might turn from our iniquities and understand your truth. Therefore, the Lord has kept the disaster in mind and brought it upon us. For the Lord our God is righteous in all the works which he does, though we have not obeyed his voice. And now, O Lord our God, who brought your people out of the land of Egypt with a mighty hand and made yourself a name, as it is this day, we have sinned, we have done wickedly. Yes, the end-time descendants of Israel, by the way, also need to heed the law of God. We have a free book on this. This is another ebook you can find at cog.org called Lost Tribes and Prophecies, What Will Happen to Australia, the British Isles, Canada, Europe, New Zealand, and the United States of America. Because we need to heed the law of God, because we were promised blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience, which you can read again in Leviticus 26, and Deuteronomy 28. Now, back to Daniel 9, this time verse 16. Daniel continues his prayer. O Lord, according to all your righteousness, I pray, let your anger and your fury be turned away from your city Jerusalem, your holy mountains, because of our sins, and for the iniquities of our fathers. Jerusalem and your people are a reproach to all those who are around us. Verse 17. Now therefore, O Lord our God, hear the prayer of your servant and his supplications, and for the Lord's sake cause your face to shine on your sanctuary, which is desolate. O my God, incline your ear and hear. Open your eyes and see our desolations, and the city which is called by your name. For we do not present our supplications before you because of our righteous deeds, but because of your great mercies. Another reason I hold this booklet up. Verse 19. O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, listen and act. Do not delay for your own sake, my God, for your city and your people who are called by your name. So Daniel's praying and said, look, we don't deserve it. So don't think God's not going to, won't listen to you because you don't deserve it. Repent. Pray to God. And I held up that booklet before. But the prayer, what does the Bible teach? The subheadline is 28 tips on improving the effectiveness of your prayer. Okay. Anyway, verse 20, you read it. Now while I was speaking, praying and confessing my sin and sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God, for the holy mountain of my God, yes, while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, who was an angel, whom I had seen in a vision at the beginning, caused to fly swiftly, reached me about the time of the evening offering, and he informed me, and he talked with me and said, O Daniel, I've now come forth to give you skill to understand. At the beginning of your supplication, the command went out, and I've come to tell you, for you are greatly beloved. Therefore, consider the matter and understand the vision. So, God sent the angel Gabriel to provide information. Verse 24. Now, I've gone through most of the verses of this book already, but so the next 90% of this sermon is related to the last few verses. Chapter 20, verse 24. 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Now, that actually relates to 490 years. And the events I just read about may or may not be in chronological sequence. Now, it says in Galatians 4:4 that Jesus came when the fullness of times had come. And this is related to this prophecy. If the anointing of the Most High is not a place, some translators, commentators think it's a place, but others believe it's a person, it would perhaps seem that the anointing of the Most High could have been when Jesus was baptized, which is an event that's mentioned in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. With the other option, it could be that when Jesus returns, because he'll be king then, and he won't be a prince like he is in Daniel 9:25. So let's read Daniel 9:25. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until the Messiah, the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, so 69 weeks. The street shall be built again upon the wall, even in troublesome times. Now, this prophecy is one of the proofs that Jesus is the Messiah. Now, I'm holding up another book we have available at ccog.org, Proof Jesus is Messiah. Goes through hundreds of scriptures in the Old Testament that Jesus fulfilled in the New Testament. But a lot of skeptics discount this, say, oh no, the people wrote the stuff in the Gospels just to make it seem like Jesus did various things. Yeah, well, they couldn't decide when Jesus was born and when his ministry was going to start. And that ties in with what we were reading here. I'll go in more depth of that in a moment. Also the fact that Jesus made various predictions that have been fulfilled outside the New Testament also is additional proof Jesus is Messiah. But Daniel 9 is one of the ways you can prove Jesus is Messiah, because he came at the right time. And we'll talk about that in more depth in a moment here. Anyway, 69 weeks from the time the decree came to rebuild Jerusalem to the Messiah. So 69 times 7 days in a week equals 483 seeming years. And that looks to point to the time when Jesus was baptized and he started his ministry. Now notice here that the Messiah is a prince. He's not the King of Kings or Lord of Lords when this starts. It's the 69 weeks. Okay. Now, let's go to the first half of Daniel 9:26. After 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. Now, the passages in Daniel 9:24-26 have been pointed out proof Jesus is the Messiah. Well, for one reason, it shows that the Messiah was supposed to come before the temple was destroyed. And we'll get to that in a moment. Further, we see that the prophecy in Daniel 9:24 ties the timing of the anointed one, in verse 26, to a decree. Now that decree is recorded in the book of Ezra chapter 7, verses 12-26. And Daniel also mentions that Jerusalem will be rebuilt, and that happened, as we can see in the book of Nehemiah. Now Daniel 9:25 says that after the cutting off the anointed one, the city will be destroyed, and the sanctuary will be destroyed as well. And actually, that's what happens in verse 20. The rest of verse 26. I haven't gotten to verse 26 yet, so I need to say that here. Okay. Anyway, in the Continuing Church of God, we've taught that Jesus was resurrected in either 31 AD, is most likely, but it possibly could have been 34 or 35 AD. Anyway, ends up that the temple was destroyed afterwards in 70 AD, and we'll get to that. Now I want to go back to something from the old Radio Church of God. This came in the Plain Truth magazine in April 1962. This is written by the late David John Hill. At the time of Jesus' life on this earth, Herod, the king of Judea, the wise men from the nations of the east, and many princes and scribes and elders, as well as common people, realized the 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel 9 was nearing its completion. Here very plainly is listed the exact time which the prophesied Messiah would appear to begin to do the work mentioned in verse 24. The command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem was given by Artaxerxes in 457 BC. Much of the book of Ezra and the entire book of Nehemiah cover this particular event. 7 weeks, 6 score and 2 weeks equals 69 weeks. So the prophecies show that from the going forth of the command to rebuild Jerusalem in 457 BC, that would be 483 years, until the appearance of the prophesied Messiah to begin to fulfill the works of verse 24. That's the end of quote. So anyway, if you add 483 years to the year 457, that brings us to the year 27 AD. There was no year zero when you go from BC to AD. And that brings us to the time, it looks like Jesus began his ministry, and it was probably in the fall of the year. And his ministry is believed to have lasted 3.5 years or perhaps longer. And the veil would have been torn, we think, in 31 AD. Now, even the Greco-Roman Catholic historian Sextus Julius Africanus pointed to the decree being from Artaxerxes as when the timing for Daniel started from. Thus, the ministry of Jesus, as well as the subsequent destruction of Jerusalem, is consistent with the prophecy in Daniel 9. Now, based on that timing, you'd think that Jews would accept Jesus, but that's generally not the case. I'm going to read something from a Jewish source. Christians base their understanding with the belief that the starting point of the prophecy begins in 444 BC with a decree issued by King Artaxerxes. 69 weeks, 483 years would bring you to 69 AD or CE. That's 7 years off the commonly accepted date Jesus was put to death. Yeah, it's true, some Protestants used 444 for the point, but it really should be 457, which is what we use, some of the ancients used, and the old Radio Church of God used. As far as Ezra, let's go to Ezra chapter 7. I'm going to read a few things there. Now this time I'm reading from the Jewish Publication Society translation. And that's because in chapter 3 of this particular book, that chapter is devoted to or focused on why Jews should accept Jesus as Messiah. I thought it'd be better to use one of their translations. So, Ezra 7, starting verse 7. And there went up some children of Israel, and of the priests and the Levites, and the singers and porters, and the Nethinim into Jerusalem in the 7th year of Artaxerxes the king. And he came to Jerusalem the 5th month, which is the 7th year of the king. Now let's bring that down to verse 11. Now this is a copy of the letter that King Artaxerxes gave Ezra the priest, the scribe, and even described the words of the commandments of the Lord and of his statutes to Israel. Quote, Artaxerxes, king of kings, unto Ezra the priest, the scribe of the law of the God of heaven, and so forth. And now I make a decree that all they of the people of Israel and the priests and Levites in my realm that are minded of their own free will go down to thee to Jerusalem. Go. Anyway, the two main Jewish arguments against this seem to be the timing of the decree and by whom and when, and whether that the anointed one doesn't have to be the Messiah. Yet, if you accept the decree of Ezra chapter 7, and that Daniel 9 was referring to the Messiah as the anointed one, as, by the way, does the complete Jewish Bible, everybody should accept that Jesus is fulfilled the timing of this. Now, what about Jesus being cut off after 62 weeks? Well, when does that 62-week period begin? Well, it has to start later than the 69 weeks, because that's when the Messiah can't be cut off before he was born. So, presuming it starts when Jerusalem was fully rebuilt, we're looking somewhere between 405 and 400 BC. And the reality is archaeologists aren't really sure when Jerusalem's rebuilding was complete. But if you wanted to go to a 31 AD point where Jesus was killed, that would say that the 62 weeks started in some point in time in either 405 or 404 BC, which is again consistent with what archaeologists say is when Jerusalem was rebuilt. Now, according to a Jewish writer by the name of Abba Hillel Silver, many Jews did expect the Messiah during the first century. He wrote, the book of Daniel was held in high regard by the people who dwelt on the mystery of the end of days. But prior to the first century, Messianic interest was not excessive. In the first century, AD, which is when Jesus came, witnessed a remarkable outburst of Messianic emotionalism. This has to be attributed to prevalent belief induced by the proper chronology of that day. Now, what does that mean in plain English? This Jewish scholar says, Jews who believed in the end of days or who focused on prophecy weren't overly concerned about the coming of the Messiah until about the time Jesus showed up, which was the first century. And that's when Jesus did show up. The Jews should have accepted that. Now there's another Jewish rabbi, he's known as Rashi, he's from the 11th century. And here's what he wrote about Daniel 9:24 to 26. 70 weeks of years have been decreed on Jerusalem, to bring upon them eternal righteousness and to anoint upon them the Holy of Holies, the ark, the altars, the holy vessels, which they will bring to them through King Messiah. The number of 7 weeks is 490 years. So I want to comment on that. So we've seen from Jewish sources they agree with the 490 years, 483 years, and stuff like that. A prince and a dignitary in the city and the sanctuary, literally the city and the holy, and the people of the coming monarch will destroy. The monarch who will come upon them. That is Titus and his armies. So, and by the way, Titus and his armies came in the year 70 AD and destroyed it. So he's got the right time period. So he's correct that the messianic prophecy was fulfilled around the time of Jesus. And there's somebody else, another rabbi called Abraham ibn Ezra. He lived from 1092 to 1167. He's considered to be one of the most distinguished biblical commentators of the Middle Ages. He taught that Daniel chapter 9 leads, the 9th chapter of it. They didn't have the chapter breaks quite then. It says Daniel leads up to Titus and the destruction. So again, we've got from a lot of Jewish sources, authorities, they agree that Daniel 9 pointed to the time of Jesus, because it had to be over by the Messiah had to come prior to the temple getting destroyed, and the temple was destroyed in August of the year 70 AD. That said, I want to read something from the Jewish Talmud. The Messiah will not come in accordance with the opinion of our rabbis. But of course, the Messiah came and will come in accordance with the scriptures and God's plan. Now, but I think that the reason that the Jews wrote this is because they falsely thought the Messiah, many of them thought the Messiah was going to come in the 2nd century with somebody called Simon Bar Kokhba. Jews should accept the chronology of Daniel chapter 9, which clearly points to the time of Jesus and the temple destruction. There's no doubt that the temple was destroyed. There should be no doubt that Jesus is the prophesied Messiah. But people don't accept that. Daniel 9 pointed to Jesus' first coming, but Daniel 9 also helps us know about Jesus' second coming as well. Furthermore, would you like to know prior to the start of the Great Tribulation in World War III about when it will begin? Well, I want to continue in Daniel 9:26. Let's read the rest of the verse. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. So that was what was fulfilled in 70 AD. The end of it shall be with a flood, and till the end of the war, desolations are determined. So you see, there's desolation again is plural. Verse 27. Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to the sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abomination shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured on a desolate. Now some teach that Jesus is the one who will confirm the covenant for many with 1 week. But we never see a mention of a 1 week covenant according to Scripture involving Jesus. Furthermore, while various ones point to Jesus being killed after a 3.5-year ministry, his ministry could have been longer than that. And while Daniel 9:26 calls this leader a prince, this same prince is later called a king of the developing European empire in Daniel chapter 11. He's called the king of the north. Why don't we go to Daniel chapter 11, verse 31. And forces will be mustered by him, and he shall defile the sanctuary fortress, and then he'll take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. The prince who confirmed the deal, that deal is the king of the north. And when he's going to muster forces, stop sacrifices, and put in the abomination of desolation. Now, one way to know that this is a European empire is to know that it was the people of the Roman Empire in the 1st century who destroyed the temple that we read about. Okay? And even Jews for Judaism say that the prince of the people will come and destroy the city and the sanctuary. Daniel 9:26 refers to the Roman legions of Vespasian, who was the emperor, and Titus, who was the general. Now, as it turns out, in the 21st century, the European Union includes much of the land of the peoples that were part of the ancient Roman Empire. And it's a prince coming from that people that verse 27 of Daniel 9 is referring to. This prophecy is telling us that there's going to be a lower level European leader who will officially start to rise up about 3.5 years before the Great Tribulation. And another fact is that the beast of the sea of Revelation 13 fits with the beast of the great sea of Daniel chapter 7. And I talked about that in a previous sermon. You can go to that. And the sea that's mentioned in the Old Testament as the great sea is the Mediterranean Sea, according to Judges and Joshua, etc. Anyway, Daniel 9:27 seems to be referring to some type of a peace deal that the Europeans will either propose or at least one leader in Europe will endorse. Maybe some version of Trump's Abraham Accords. Now, the Living Church of God, when I was in it, used to know the truth about this. For example, here's something that they posted on August 13, 2013. Bible prophecy reveals that at the end of the age, a German-led European beast power will enter a 7-year peace deal with many Middle East nations. Daniel 9:27. But this beast power will terminate the agreement after only 3.5 years and attempt to exert total control over the region. Daniel 9:27. A desperate time may call for desperate measures. So they used to teach that. Unfortunately, they, like the United Church of God, have kind of gone both ways on this. So I'm not going to read this, but what both the Living Church and United Church of God did. But basically, they both say, well, maybe it was actually Jesus who confirms the covenant for 1 week. It's odd that the Living Church of God pointed to tradition, which is kind of interesting because they'll condemn the Roman Catholics for doing that, but they're pointing to a tradition that happens to be an inaccurate tradition. But again, when I was in the Living Church of God, both Dr. Roderick C. Meredith and I, basically the same day and month, he come up to the same conclusion. And I know that because I call him up, rare time I'd call him on the Sabbath, when I concluded about this verse, and I talked to him, he said he'd been studying the same thing, and he agreed with me. But since his death, the Living Church has moved further away from that. Because you've got to consider the reality is that Jesus did not destroy the city nor the sanctuary, and there's no evidence he confirmed a 7-year covenant. Okay? And interestingly, the Living Church does teach that the sacrifices are going to be stopped in the future, and that's consistent with what we in the Continuing Church of God teach as well. Anyway, the error that the tradition that they're relying on is one from an article that was written by the late William Dankenbrink when he was part of the Radio Church of God. And then, by the way, Dankenbrink later realized he was wrong on this point. But that's the tradition that the Living Church actually pointed to. All right. Now, I should point out, let's go to Revelation 17, verse 12. About 3.5 years after the deal of Daniel 9:27 is confirmed by the prince, 2 reorganizations are going to happen in Europe. Revelation 17, starting verse 12. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, which we've received no kingdom as of yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. And these are of one mind, and they'll give their power and authority to the beast. And these kings have no kingdom, but they'll attain one. That's some type of a reorganization, or you could even call it a major reset, because they're going to give power to the beast in verse 13. And anyway, the beast is the one who is the prince in Daniel 9:26. Anyway, of course, for the sacrifices to stop, they have to be started, and that hasn't happened yet. Now, I mentioned this is considered to be a peace deal. Why? Well, there's several reasons. There's a couple of verses in Daniel I'm going to go to Daniel 8:25. I'm going to read from the Old King James. This is talking about this beast leader. Through his policy he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand. He shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, and he shall be broken without hand. And in Daniel 11, and I know we're going to go to Daniel 11 later in another sermon, but Daniel 11 starting verse 23. After the league is made with him, he will act deceitfully. So maybe after one of the reorganizations, he'll come up and be strong with a small number of people. He shall enter peaceably, even in the richest places of the province. He shall do what his fathers have not done, and his forefathers. Enter peaceably, I think this may have to do with the surprise NATO attack against the United States and Britain and Canada. He shall disperse among them the plunder, the spoil, the riches, and he shall devise plans against the strongholds, the strongest fortresses, the United States, but only for a time. So he gives the impression this is going to be peace. And this is the same one who confirms the deal. Now I want to read a different translation. Daniel 9:27. This is from the New Living Translation. The ruler will make a treaty with the people for a period of one set of 7. But after half of this time, he'll put an end to the sacrifices and offerings. And as a climax of his terrible deeds, he'll set up a sacrilegious object that causes desecration until the fate decreed for this defiler is finally poured on him. Now, a covenant treaty deal is considered by some to be a peace deal, and we consider that in the Continuing Church of God. One of the reasons is that the same Hebrew word for covenant or treaty is used in the book of Joshua. Book of Joshua chapter 9 verse 15. You don't have to go there. It says, Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant. Now that's the same word in Daniel 9:27. With them and let them live. And the rulers of the congregation swore to them. So this kind of covenant is some kind of a peace deal. And so now I think that I've been saying for years we're going to have a regional war before we have a peace deal there. Now we've had the Hamas-Israel-Gaza war. We've had Israel-Iran. We've had the United States be involved in Iran attacks. That could be enough, and we could see the deal come because of that, but it may not be. I still think we're going to see greater damage happen beforehand. It's not strictly necessary, but Isaiah 22:6-9 about the destruction or great damage happening to Jerusalem, I've tended to think would happen before the peace deal, but biblically it could happen a little bit later than that, like when Jesus talked about the armies, Luke 21:20. Anyway, getting back to Daniel 11:24 shows this leader is going to be accumulating wealth. And perhaps to back up or support maybe a European currency, we may see the Vatican pledge some of its great wealth to there. Now I want to comment, by the way, that the Prince of Daniel 9:27 is not Russia. Russia is not the king of the north. Russia does not border the Mediterranean Sea like Europe does. Okay. Now, there's going to be this peace deal. Now Jesus said the peacemakers are blessed in Matthew 5:9. But he also warned that there are going to be people who will be false. For example, Matthew 7:15, you don't have to go there. It says, Jesus said, beware of false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing. So they look like you're peaceful, but inwardly they're ravenous wolves. And in Revelation 13:11, and this is one who will be the final Antichrist. And I saw another beast come out of the earth. Now this isn't the king of the north one. This is one who's going to tell people to worship the king of the north. And he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke like a dragon. People are going to be misled about this peace deal, and they're going to believe it's good. Anyway, we see in verse 27 that sacrifices will be stopped, and they've got to be started. And this isn't referring to what Jesus did, because you look in places like Daniel 11:31 and Daniel 12:11, it's a future stopping of the sacrifices. Not the fact that because Jesus came, there's no more a need for the sacrifices. Okay. Now, if the king of the north, it's the king of the north who stops the sacrifice of Daniel 11:31. And he's the same one who stops them in, who was the prince who stops them in Daniel 9:27. So we talk about different weeks. What about the 70th week? What is that? It begins when this prince, somebody from the area of the ancient Roman Empire peoples, which would include Germany, by the way, is going to make a covenant with many for 7 years. It's going to be broken in the middle, but it's still going to be ended in 7 years. And at the end of that time, Jesus is going to come and rule. When he rules, he'll bring in righteousness, the millennial kingdom of God, per Jeremiah 23:5. And that's what's supposed to happen after the 70 weeks are fulfilled, consistent with Daniel 9:24. Now, as far as this being a 7-year deal, the Roman Catholic bishop Hippolytus of Rome in the early 3rd century, he's probably the first one in writing that we have that said this is a 7-year deal, and then afterwards Jesus would come. So that's been out in the literature for a long time. Now I've been focusing a bit on the first part of Daniel 9:27, but let's go to the second half here. Even until the consummation, which is determined, is poured out on the desolate. Now that's the last 3.5 years, and it could relate to what looks like could be the last 3.5 years of the desolations of Jerusalem prophesied in Daniel 9 verse 2 that I said at the beginning of the sermon. All right, so that's where I think this ties in, because again, Daniel 9:2 says desolations, plural. And people recognize a desolation. Now, there have been other desolations of Jerusalem, okay? But they lasted longer. So you've got, let's say, the 66.5-year one, which the study Bible pointed to. There's a couple others that lasted about 70 years. But if it's 66.5, there's 3.5 years left, and that ties into here. So that's something that I'm looking at and thought I'd mention to you today as I do more research along this time. Now, the consummation of Daniel 9:27 seems to ties into the final day of the Lord, and based upon what the Bible teaches about the 7 churches of Revelation 2 and 3, it's my position that the 7-year component will not be clear enough for the Greco-Roman Catholics, Protestants, nor most who claim to be in the Church of God to know what's happening when it occurs. Just like many don't consider certain prophetic leadership matters clear enough now, the vast majority will not truly understand prophetic implications when this is done. We in the continuing Church of God will say it's done. People are going to say we are wrong. Oh, there'll be some within the Protestant world probably think we're right. And there'll be some maybe in the Church of God world who are, well, hopefully, and those who are, who realize we're right, hopefully will be Philadelphian, and God will call them to be part of the Philadelphian remnant that we lead. Let's kind of look at the time here. We're going to pass through some of these things. As far as Roman Catholics go, the current position of Roman Catholic scholars is this stuff was, Daniel 9:27 was fulfilled when Emperor Antiochus was there. And this is from a book, What's the Bible Say About the End Times? A Catholic View. It's got an imprimatur, came out in 2004. As far as, let me also comment about Islam. We've got a book about Islam and prophecy as well. Islam, they actually say the 7-year deal as well. They say, Muhammad said there'll be 4 peace agreements between you and the Roman Christians. The 4th agreement will be mediated through a person who will be a progeny of the Honorable Aaron, Moses' brother, and will be upheld for 7 years. So there's, in Islamic prophecy, a position to be a 7-year deal between some Muslims, which would be people of North Africa and the Middle East. The Bible points to North Africa and the Middle East, didn't call them Muslims, and they weren't Muslims then. Muhammad didn't show up that early. He wasn't until A.D., not B.C. But they have a European leader involved. They have somebody from the tribe of Israel involved. And they've got the Muslims involved. And that's very consistent. And then they say that it will be broken in the middle of the deal. They also see that the Antichrist will reign. And then after 3.5 years, Jesus will come as the Messiah. And they get all that correct. The part they don't get correct is that when Jesus comes, they say he's going to tell people that Islam is the correct religion as opposed to the true original Christian church. Okay. As far as having a temporary deal goes, let me simply say that the group called Hamas is against making long-term deals with Israel, as well as the Muslim Brotherhood. They say very clear that this is from the Muslim Brotherhood. The land of Palestine is all Islamic, and not 1 inch of it can be given up, nor its inheritance sold. Okay, so that's their position. But we've seen with various Arab groups, including Hamas, that they're usually willing to make a ceasefire deal or a temporary deal, and this deal will be temporary. The fact it's got a time period on it, I think, will also be consistent with that. Now, I will also comment before I go any further that there was a guy by the name of Joel Richardson. He wrote a book called The Islamic Antichrist, and they say that it was Arabs who destroyed the sanctuary, even though it was a Roman army. They say there were a lot of Arabs in the Roman army, therefore it was an Arab who did it, and therefore the final Antichrist is going to be an Arab. Well, that's just flat out wrong. And also Joseph Farah of, what's his website called? WorldNet Daily. He's been pushing that nonsense out. I won't take the time to go into all the depth on this, but there are articles at the cogwriter.com website that show that the final Antichrist is not Islamic. Anyway, Muslims say the deal will be broken. Daniel 9:27 says the deal will be broken. Now let's go to Luke in the New Testament, Luke 21. I'll give you time to get there. Starting in verse 20, I'll read some words of Jesus. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you know its desolation is near. But then let those in Judea flee to the mountains, those in the midst of her depart, let not those who are in the country enter her. For these are the days of vengeance, and all that are written that may be fulfilled. But woe to those who are pregnant and nursing babies in those days. There will be great distress upon the land, upon the wrath upon the people. They shall fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the times the Gentiles are fulfilled. And I think that's that 3.5 years from the desolations that we read about in Daniel 9:2. I should also comment that I think the Vatican will probably be involved with the peace deal. The Vatican wants more access to various sites in Jerusalem, so we'll see how that goes. Now, why will most people not understand when the deal of Daniel 9:27 happens? There's going to be at least 8 reasons that I want to go through. First, many believe that the prophecies in Daniel 9 have already been fulfilled prior to the time of Jesus. This includes anti-biblical scholars, many modern Roman Catholics, and even Protestants. Thus, they don't think there's any peace deal to be prophesied the Bible's talking about. Second, Jesus told people to watch in Mark 13:35 through 37. And some people won't be watching, so they won't know. Third, even claimed Church of God groups, such as, for example, the Philadelphia Church of God Worldwide Association, COG, Restored Church of God, believes the prophecies, or at least key elements, of Daniel 9:27 have already been fulfilled, hence they're not looking for a peace deal. I should comment that as far as United Church of God, and I mentioned it before, while most of them don't understand Daniel 9:26-27, Don Ward actually had put something out before, I don't even know if he's in United or Chicago right now, suggesting he understood it right, but anyway, a lot of these groups tend to believe that even though they think the last half of Daniel 9:27 has to be filled, they seem the first half has been, and so they won't understand it. Fourth, there's not going to be what's called a pre-tribulation rapture of the church, and there's a lot of people who think that that's what has to happen, and so and those who that there won't be, they won't understand it. Also, some of these people also think that there's going to be a Russia attack take over the Middle East in a fulfillment of Ezekiel 38:39, but that doesn't happen until after the return of Jesus. We have various videos on that. And you had people like the Protestant Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins from the Left Behind series. They held this kind of position. So, as well as the late Protestant scholar Dr. Wolford. Anyway, fifth, many in Islam will think that they've risen up and with more rising to go. And so they're not going to consider the downside, even though even Islamic prophecies talk about the downside of this deal. Sixth, if this peace deal comes after a war, many will believe peace propaganda. So I want to read about peace propaganda. Let's go to the book of Ezekiel, Ezekiel chapter 13. I call it peace propaganda. The Bible doesn't use the word propaganda. Ezekiel 13, starting verse 10. Because they've seduced my people, saying, peace when there is no peace. And that's what we just heard actually with the current ceasefire. While I'm doing this, there's a ceasefire between Iran and Israel. It's not peace. It could end. It could be ending before people watch this. It'd be ending while I'm speaking. We'll see. I don't know when it's going to end, but it's not going to remain. Anyway, peace when there is no peace. One builds a wall and they plaster it with untempered mortar. Say to those who plaster with untempered mortar, it will fall. Sure, there will be flooding rains, and you, O great hailstones, shall fall, and stormy wind shall tear it down. Surely, when the wall was fallen, will it not be said to you, where is the mortar for which you plastered it? Therefore, thus says the Lord, I will cause a stormy wind to break forth in my fury. There'll be a flooding rain in my anger, and great hailstones in fury to consume it. So I'll break down the wall you have plastered with untempered mortar, and bring it down to the ground, so its foundation will be uncovered, and it will fall, and you shall be consumed in the midst of it. You shall know that I am the Lord. As far as untempered mortar, I thought of this while I'm saying this. This is not in my notes, so you won't find this online. We had a problem when we had a chicken coop that we have this type of rats, and they would go through the ground. They'd eat the chicken food. So I put some type of cement down, but I didn't set it. I just put it down there. Well, it finally dried. The rats ate through it. It was about this thick. Rats ate through it to get to the chicken food. So that kind of reminds me of untempered mortar. And verse 15, I will accomplish my wrath on the wall and all who plastered it with untempered mortar. And that's kind of like these peace deals. I'll say to you, the wall is no more, nor are these who plastered it. That is, the prophets of Israel who prophesy concerning Jerusalem, who see visions of peace for her when there is no peace. And we know, why don't you go there? 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Read about this in the New Testament. For the Apostle Paul wrote, for you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. So when they say to you, peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. Okay, I already talked about that. This is when Don Ward was in the United Church of God. He understood who the he was. Okay. So I don't need to read through that. You can read that if you want to read those articles there. Okay, anyway, the seventh reason people will understand what's going on is some think the final Antichrist will be Islamic. Final Antichrist will not be Islamic. I've held this book up a couple of times. It's not the case. Yet, since certain Protestants, certain Roman Catholics, and certain Church of God people understand there's to be a deal in Daniel 9:27, why won't most understand it? Well, there's an eighth reason. If you look at the second and third chapters of the book of Revelation, you'll find at least part of 4 Christian groups are left at the time of the end. Because these are sequential, the implication is the largest one is the church of the Laodiceans in Revelation 3:14. This is the only group where the plural is used. It's not just the Church of Laodicea, it's the Laodiceans plural. For example, the Church of Philadelphia is singular. And these are Church of God groups. They're not Greco-Roman, Catholic, or Protestant groups. And they're not going to understand. Now in Daniel chapter 12, let's go there. I want to read some things that Daniel was told, starting in verse 9. He said, "Go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end. Many shall be purified and made white and refined." So a lot of people are going to go through the tribulation, including Christians. "But the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand." Verse 11, "And from the time the daily sacrifice is taken away, and the abomination of desolation is set up, there be 1,290 days. Blessed he who waits and comes to 1,335 days. Notice, it's only the wise. It's not a reference to all Christians, but only the most faithful remnant. As far as the days, I plan on talking about that in a later sermon. And in Revelation chapter 2 and 3, it's only the Philadelphian Christians that are promised protection from the coming hour of trial. You can read that. Why don't we go to Revelation chapter 3? I know I've read this many times before, but I think it's important because people don't want to distinguish between some of the Church of God groups. I think they're all the same. They're not all the same. They have different prophetic understandings, different focuses. Jesus said, and to the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, "These things says he who is holy, he who is true, who is the key of David, he who opens and no one shuts, and what shuts and no one opens. I know your works." Philadelphia works are different than the other churches. "See, I set before you an open door, no one can shut it. If you have a little strength, and have kept my word, and have not denied my name. Indeed, I'll make those who are the synagogue of Satan, who say they're Jews, are not, but they lie. Indeed, I'll make them come and worship before your feet. You know that I've loved you." Verse 10, "Because you have kept my command to persevere, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that will come upon the whole world." We're talking about the Great Tribulation. "To test those who dwell on the earth. Behold, I'm coming quickly. Hold fast to what you have, that no one may take your crown. He who overcomes will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. And he shall go out no more. And I'll write on him the name of my God, the name of the city of my God, New Jerusalem." Philadelphians have the Philadelphian work. They put the proper emphasis on the work of God. And you want to see that, check our sermons out on this channel. Philadelphians represent the pillar and ground of truth of 1 Timothy 3:15. Without accepting the type of doctrinal or character compromises others have tolerated, including my last Church of God group. Also, many groups whose leaders were once part of the old worldwide Church of God no longer hold fast to officially teach church eras as they were once taught. I'm talking about UCG, COG, AIC, COGWA, ICG, CGOM, CGI, CGG. Hence, unlike those of Sardis, they're not going to be aware or prepared enough. As far as independent Christians go, the Bible warns that all should gather together before the decree is issued, so they may be hidden in the day of the Lord's anger. And you can read about that in the first 3 verses of the book of Zephaniah chapter 2. Those who fail to support the true Philadelphia remnant portion of the Church of God will not be protected. I should also add that neither the Living Church of God nor the Philadelphia Church of God understand the sequence of Daniel 11. And because of that, they're not going to know when the tribulation is going to begin unless they change it. The other churches of God, COGWA had some stuff off on it, and I think United did as well. But I did more about them on a couple of different points. Anyway, if you go to Revelation 12, why don't we do that? Starting in verse 14. We also read, "It's only a portion of true Christians who get protected in the place of safety in the wilderness." Now, some Protestants have a different explanation of this. Some Protestants say they are raptured and all the Christians are gone, but that during the Great Tribulation, some Jews will be converted and may end up in Petra in Jordan. And so what they think is happening here, But that's actually not what it says. It shows a distinguishment here between the Philadelphian Christians who are protected and the non-Philadelphians Christians who are not. So let me read this. Revelation chapter 12, starting in verse 14. But the woman, the church, was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time, times, and half a times. That's 3.5 years. From the presence of the serpent. So the serpent spewed out water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. So something scary is going to happen. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened up its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. Okay, so then they're protected. But notice what happens in verse 17. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring. This is the rest of the church. Notice the distinguishing part. Who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Now, one of the reasons that Protestants say, oh no, this is only talking about Jews, you got a bunch of Protestants who do not believe that they need to keep the 10 Commandments. Now, we have a book on this, on the 10 Commandments, available at ccog.org. We also have another one called Hope and Salvation, How the Continuing Church of God Differs from Protestantism. You'll see this is a fairly thick book. I challenge and continue to challenge Protestants on this because I conclude in this book repeatedly by quoting Protestant scholars and Protestant beliefs, Protestants do not believe in sola scriptura. Okay? And no Protestant has attempted to challenge me on this yet. At some point in time, I assume somebody will. But the reality is they're not going to know what's happening. And the fact is early Christians all believed they needed to keep or strive to keep the 10 Commandments. That is a fact of history. All scholars know that. So when you hear these Protestants say you don't have to keep the 10 Commandments, or you only have to keep 9 of them, which is ridiculous, because they don't want to keep the Sabbath one, they're wrong. This is not a reference just to Jewish Christians, but to all non-Philadelphian Christians, all non-protected Christians at the end time. Because the Christians keep the commandments of God, which Jesus did, and have the testimony of Jesus. And again, you can prove Jesus is Messiah. If you are willing, if you haven't done so. Get into that one. Anyway, Revelation 12, 14 to 17 is showing that not all Christians are protected. So we had a couple different groups of them. Now, if most Christians knew and understand the deal, they'd be able to calculate 3.5 years after it, and they'd know when the time to flee. But Jesus made it clear that when the second portion of Daniel 9:27 was fulfilled, which is shown to be in Daniel 11:31, that's time to flee. But let's go to Mark 13. Mark 13, I'm going to start in verse 14. Jesus said, "And when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet," so again, Jesus is referring to Daniel, he's talking about the abomination of desolation. I've read in Daniel 9:27 and Daniel 11:31. We've got the word David that Jesus was referring to here. Standing where it ought not, let the reader understand. Jesus said that because most will not understand, I think. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Verse 15, let him who is on the housetop go not down to the house, nor let him enter to take anything of his house. Let him who is in the field not go back and get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and nursing babies in those days. Pray that your flight not be in the winter. And in Matthew's account it says, or in the Sabbath. For in those days there will be tribulation such as not been since the beginning of the creation, which God created until this time, nor ever shall be. And unless the Lord shortened those days, no flesh should be saved. But for the elect's sake, whom he chose, he shortened those days. Now, Matthew 24:15 to 22 basically says the same thing. Thus, Jesus' warning is repeated twice. And also a third time in Luke 31. Though only mentioning the coming desolation, but not Daniel by name. So Daniel's mentioned by name in 2 of the accounts, but not 3. It can be concluded that the abomination spoken of by Daniel is a very key prophecy. And since it's tied into the deal that's confirmed for 7 years, if everyone would understand when that happens, nearly everyone would flee. But we see in passages such as Revelation 12:17 that this does not happen. Why? Most Christians and most others who profess Christianity will not be protected. They're not going to see the fulfillment of this prophecy, or they'll discount what it means. Maybe I'll make some kind of major personal gaffe or mistake or some character flaw or something. Say, oh, he can be the one who gives the decree. And I may not be, by the way, but just for the sake of argument, perhaps I will be. To say, oh, you can't trust him or whatever. Okay? They will come up with reasons. They'll say, it doesn't really mean that. That's only an extreme view of the confirmation, or various other nonsense things. But they will not know. So, Jesus promised to protect Philadelphians. Most others aren't going to see it. Remember, the person who's going to confirm this deal is only a prince. He's not a king. It's another reason people won't understand it. And it's possible that the deal might have multiple year parts. Maybe it'll have an 8-year part, maybe a 6-year part, maybe a 7-year part, 9, whatever. There'd be another reason people say, no, that's not it. Maybe it's a 10-year deal and something happens at year 7. Okay? We don't exactly know at this time. Even the man who became the apostle, Nathaniel, by the way, tried to argue against Jesus because where he thought Jesus was from. Others did the same thing and said that Scripture supported their view why Jesus wasn't the one. You can read this in John 1:43-51, John 7:41-42. Others will point to other scriptures as proof that we're wrong and that they're right to discount the deal in Daniel 9:27, but they'll be wrong. And let's see. Oh, one error that the Living Church of God put out. This is June 13th, 2014. It says, this beast will broker a temporary peace in the Holy Land between Muslims, Jews, and Christians. Okay, now, what's wrong with that? Because they used to, because it said, didn't you just teach this? Well, one, that's not what we've said. The Bible doesn't say he's going to broker the deal. It says he confirms the deal. So if he doesn't broker the deal, Living Church, for example, will not see it. What if the deal is simply an expansion of something like from Donald Trump or something, and the beast, who's the prince, only confirms part of it for 7 years? And what if the group doesn't know who the beast is going to be? Anyway, the deal will start to be broken by Daniel 11:31. By that time, many are going to understand, but it's going to be too long for a lot of people to understand that that's the case. And the confirmation might be just part of a really complicated agreement. Based on current geopolitics, it would seem the United States will be involved in negotiations, and possibly Russia, but they're not specified in Daniel 9:27, but there are other hints in Daniel 11 the United States could be involved. Since Jesus talks about international involvement in Luke 21:20, perhaps the United Nations or something like that will have some involvement for a time. And the deal looks like it's going to include Israel and some Arab lands. And many are going to discount the deal because they're going to hope to see certain signs that aren't going to be there. I want to go to Matthew chapter 12. Starting verse 39. Jesus taught, an evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. Then he talked about as Jonah was in the belly as a great fish for 3 days and 3 nights, the Son of Man will be that in the heart of the earth. He says men of Nineveh are going to rise up in judgment because there's someone greater than Jonah here. The Queen of the South will rise up in judgment against this generation and condemn it, for she came to the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. Indeed, one greater than Solomon was there. He's talking about his generation at the time. But he's also saying that people didn't listen when they should have. Okay? The reality is Jesus came near the time when many expected the Messiah was going to come. Yet, since Jesus didn't appear as many expected, they disbelieved, and some counted on scriptures that they misunderstood. They were sure it was proof Jesus was not the Messiah. But as I said before, you can prove from scriptures that Jesus was Messiah, as well as a bunch of Jewish writings. Because they didn't understand about Jesus, all about Jesus, they were wrong. Even the great prophet John the Baptist had doubts about Jesus. You read that in Luke chapter 7. And Jesus had to say, blessed are those who aren't offended in him, or because of him. And some will be offended by the truth and not accept it, including most end-time Christians. Anyway, it's reasonable to conclude that the deal of Daniel 9:27 will not be clear enough for most true Christians to understand. The Bible only says that a prince of Daniel 9:26 will confirm it or cause it to prevail for 1 week. It doesn't say necessarily he makes it, he just confirms it. And again, it could be many different parts of it. The reason most Christians will not see the deal is that most Christians think that they're fine. They won't believe that confirmation is the right one. They won't do all that Jesus wants people to do in the end times. In Luke 21, I want to read a couple of verses. Starting in verse 35. Jesus told his people to pray about this, as most would not understand. Quote, "For it will come as a snare on all those who dwell on the face of the whole earth. Watch therefore and pray always that you may be accounted worthy to escape these things and stand before the Son of Man." You might say that you pray about this. That's good. But I want to go to Luke chapter 1, starting verse 22. Notice what Jesus' half-brother wrote. "But be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and is not a doer, he's like a man observing his natural face in the mirror. If he observes himself, he goes away and he immediately forgets what kind of man he was. But he who looks into the perfect law of liberty and continues in it, and is not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this one will be blessed in what he does." Why is that important? You're not only supposed to pray to be counted worthy, you're supposed to be a doer of the work. You don't need to be among those who don't see. Gather together, as God says in Zephaniah 2. It's the highly dedicated Philadelphians in the real Church of God that will finish the work, the final phase of it. So anyway, that's Daniel chapter 9, and I do plan to cover other chapters of Daniel in the next sermon or two. This is Dr. Bob Thiel, the Continuing Church of God.